All right, welcome everybody to Scotch and Watch, the first one of the new year. Now, I was bouncing around LinkedIn last week and I chanced across a post by one of the smartest people I know, and he's going to appreciate me telling him that. Stuart Forrest heads up global audience development for global media group Bauer. And he was pondering on LinkedIn where AI overviews is leading us. So he and I jumped on a call. And his insights were absolutely fascinating to me. I know you all know that I'm obsessed already by AI overviews. So I invited him on the pod to share. And one of the things we discussed was that the data he believes shows that AI overviews might just be the phase of a bigger shift. And so today, here he is, to share his playbook for how to remain visible in search and relevant to audiences. Stuart, how are you, buddy?
I'm okay. Thank you, Ricky. 7:02 on a wintry Friday morning.
I was going to say, it's absolutely freezing where you are, I understand. I was watching the football. I was watching the Arsenal game this morning and it looked absolutely freezing.
Yeah, so there you are with a glass of scotch at 7:00 on a Friday evening after 35 degrees, and I've just dragged myself out of bed, and it's the dark days of January. So no better time to talk about the future of SEO, right?
The audience are very appreciative of your time, my friend. So, look, I've had this kind of negative view that, what's the point of SEO if Google search is dropping in importance? From an outsider view, who cares anymore? But you think there's more to it, and so I'm really interested to hear from you. What do you think about the industry? Where is SEO right now? Let's start at the very beginning. Fundamentally, where is it at?
Where is SEO at? Good question, and one that any SEO is wrestling with day by day. I think fundamentally it's in good shape, right? Because the reality is that consumers need to discover digital content, and SEOs are in the business of ensuring that digital content can be discovered. We tend to focus on Google search as a surface, but increasingly a lot of the principles that determine visibility and engagement in Google search also apply to other surfaces, whether that's other Google surfaces like Google Discover, or in fact, some of the newer rivals to Google as the dominant place where we go online for information. So the obvious one is things like ChatGPT, but I would extend it to some of the social media platforms. Same principle, right? Somebody's going online to find out something or to enjoy some content, and our job is to make sure that what we're producing is visible when they do that, and that we succeed in engaging them. So Google search is undoubtedly still the dominant force, and my personal feeling is that it will be for some time to come. There's a lot of talk about the decline of Google. There's a lot of hand-wringing and worrying. Google's been at 90% of all online searches for some time. It dropped just below 90% last year, but we're talking about small changes. I think we underestimate the power of human habit, and many consumers are a quarter century or more sometimes into their online habits, and habits take time to change, right? Bauer as a business, I think it's very interesting and a salutary lesson that Bauer as a business still sells 4 million print TV listings magazines every week, right? We would assume in our digital bubble that consumer habits have changed such that nobody buys print TV listings magazines. They don't. Everybody still does. I think that tells you that consumer habits die hard, no matter how fast things are actually moving in the tech landscape. So we have to think about what's coming next. We have to think about how some of those habits are changing, how some surfaces are starting to rival Google's dominance as where we go online for information. But I think if we walk away from that core engine, then we risk losing the business we have today, as well as perhaps missing the opportunity to build the business for tomorrow.
Very interesting. All right, so I'm going to get to some of the detail and nerd out on that a little bit with the audience. But before we do, can you just give me a bit of an oversight of the Bauer business and the audience of Bauer? Who are they? I mean, you're the guy that should know. You're the boss.
Yeah. So that's a good question. So firstly, Bauer's a very large family-owned private business headquartered in Germany, but with operating offices in the UK, France, and a good chunk of Northern Europe. The business breaks into a number of big parts. So broadly, audio, outdoor, and publishing. I'm in the publishing section. We can deal with audio and outdoor quite quickly. We are a very large in the UK radio business with a lot of really very large and household name radio brands. Absolute Radio and various others. If you come to our London offices, as you walk through the offices, you will think first and foremost that we're a radio business. Outdoor is a business that we bought last year, Clear Channel Northern Europe. So that's now within the business as Bauer Outdoor. Outdoor and audio complement each other very, very well as advertising businesses for out of home. So those two sit nicely together. I'm not at all involved in that part of the business. My focus is publishing. And when we look at publishing, that really splits between print and digital, rather obviously, as you'd expect from most publishers. So my remit is really driving organic audience of various different types to our digital properties. And Bauer, and that's mostly across the UK and Germany. We don't actually operate any brands across both territories, but we exist in a lot of the same sectors. So the really big key sectors for us are, really large scale, kind of broad interest areas like women's lifestyle, fashion, beauty, TV, and entertainment. And then after that, we go into sort of large specialist sectors. So things like autos is very big to us in both Germany and the UK. In the UK, we're in cars and motorbikes, both passion enthusiast brands like Car or Motorcycle News, but also more kind of focused on the buying, solving the problem of buying the right car. So a brand like Parker's. And then once you go beyond those sort of very large scale, we're into more sort of specialist verticals. So and those are, when I say specialist, I don't mean small necessarily. They're very, very big. So for example, golf, huge global pastime. Today's golfer, one of the world's leading golf brands. We're into outdoor leisure, things like Live for the Outdoors. In Germany, we're in a lot of sort of home hobbies, DIY hobbies. And then we go into things like parenting and various other smaller sectors like, angling, for example. So we're really there either to help you make crucial life decisions about where you're spending large amounts of money, or we are accompanying you when you are doing what you love in your free time. So we're sort of, pretty omnipresent. And certainly in the UK, brands like Grazia, Car, Angling Times, Motorcycle News, those are well-loved household brands with a significant history and both substantial current business in print and accompanying presence on digital and social and various other surfaces.
How big's the audience, digital and physical combined, do you think?
I mean, I wouldn't be able to share details because we're privately owned business, but it's in the tens of millions every month across both territories. So look, we're not at news scale, and it's a fragmented audience. Actually, that's very interesting from an advertising perspective because you've got lots and lots of different advertising segments that you can bundle up and sell. So it's a really good business. Let's be clear about that.
Yeah, so basically that means that you've got a ton of data. So you spend, I don't know what proportion of your day every day, but you spend your time in numbers being strategic about what's working and what's not, and what's driving the traffic and what's retaining the audience and what's engaging them and what they like. So you're the perfect person to have on and talk about this. But you shocked me. We had a chat about this the other day. You shocked me. You told me that, because I'm a bit of a naysayer about AI overviews. I saw it very early. I warned everybody about it. In fact, the first time you and I met was on stage. You moderated me on a. I think I got about 8 hours notice that I was on that stage. I was literally.
That's right. Yeah, you've flown in from Australia.
That's right. You need to be here at 4. And I was trying to kill my jet lag. Next thing I know, I'm on stage with you, and I was kind of warning people in the audience then, about AI overviews. Wasn't even called AI overviews then. It was brand new. It was just coming out.
Yeah.
And I just, I was really worried that this was going to be kind of a total killer for the industry. It was going to lead us to Google Zero. You have a slightly different view. You from your data, from your experience, you don't think that AI overviews is necessarily the end product. Am I right?
No, look, I think one of the oldest jokes in SEO is that whenever we're asked a question, the answer we say is, well, it depends, right? And and sometimes it's confused for sort of not giving a clear answer. I think what it means for me is that actually just there's nuance in everything, right? So the absolutes make the headlines, but the reality is that there's nuance. So let's you sort of go back to the beginning and think, why have Google done this, right? Google have introduced AI features into the search engine results page, the SERP, in direct response to the emergence of ChatGPT 3 years ago as a challenger to Google as the dominant place where we go online for information.
So you don't think they would have done it had ChatGPT not been around? This is a responsive.
Yeah, look, who knows, right? We will never know. The first thing to say is, LLMs didn't arrive at Google with ChatGPT. Google's been using a large language model and natural language processing to understand and value the information it can present to users since 2015, 2016. So that in itself is not a new thing at all. SEO, it was already evolving fast. The idea of, when we talk about Google Zero, what we really mean is a zero-click search environment.
Yeah.
Zero clicks, zero click searches have been a thing for 10 years, right? We passed 50% of all searches being zero click a long time before ChatGPT emerged. So there's a lot of people who are suddenly focused on this, who suddenly think we've seen this precipitous decline in clicks from search and this massive rise in behavior. It's just not true, right? People who work in SEO and have done for any length of time know it's just not true. But to come back to my point, they introduced these features in response to ChatGPT, right? If you think about what that means for Google, actually a lot of these AI features, aside from any upside in usability for consumers, which is absolutely a thing and a legitimate reason for doing it, but if you look at the bare business economics of it for Google, it's not as desirable as a 10 blue links search page. And why is that? There's a few reasons. Firstly, like for like, delivering an AI response uses more compute than a 10 blue links response. So it's more expensive for Google to deliver. I'm not completely on top of the economics, and of course they will work on driving down the cost of that. But it is more cost like for like. The second thing
Yeah.
is that the advertising model on AI features is not as clear as it is on a very mature blue links internet, right? And again, they'll develop that, and they've got enormous market power here, and of course they will find their way through it. So that's point two. Point three is that from a data collection perspective, Google's algorithms depend to a very large extent on how people interact with the search results and what that tells them about whether what they've done is the right ordering of results in the search. Right? That algorithm is it's not the case that it kind of stays the same and then they release a change 2 or 3 times a year. It's evolving constantly in response to the data. So an AI-based interface just delivers a lower click stream of information to Google that tells them whether or not they did the right thing in choosing site A over site B. So they're not blind, but they're certainly losing some of the data. And I suppose point four, and by the way, I have our mutual friend and colleague David Buttle to thank for these insights. He's covered this very eloquently. Point four is that people like me working in publishers, Google they absolutely depend on content from publishers and other websites to power their web. They are troublesome to deal with, but it's undesirable for them to be at war with publishers. That's the truth. It's not good for business. So point four is that, people like me rail against the fact that all of a sudden our value exchange has been tipped upside down compared to a click-based 10 blue links internet. It attracts regulatory attention. It's just undesirable. So if you accept all of that to be true, actually the pace at which Google will roll this stuff out will be determined by, I think, how much they need to, the extent to which they can build that advertising business, the extent to which they feel like they need to stay ahead of Google, of ChatGPT and other rivals. And so they're looking at this really, really closely. So where are we 3 years on? Well, all that I'm reading about the latest Gemini models compared to the latest ChatGPT models are that it's starting to pull ahead in quality terms, right? Gemini, the latest Gemini model is qualitatively better than the latest 5.2 model. We saw before Christmas that Sam Altman declared a code red at ChatGPT, which meant that all of their engineers that were working on other projects suddenly start focusing on the game of catching up with Google. What does that mean for what they moved away from developing? Well, a big chunk of it was ad products, right? So ChatGPT has an existential problem, which is if you look at any of the projections on the cost to deliver the product over the next 2 to 3 years versus the revenue stream from their current revenue stream, which is premium subscriptions, they're in trouble, right? They're in trouble. They need to build an advertising product for that to be sustainable. And they also have to win the war for consumer attention. So I think we're in a place now where Google probably feels like it may well be able to hang on to its position as the gatekeeper of information on the internet. And I think that will determine the pace at which they move from where we are today, which is a 10 blue links web, to the sort of Google Zero. The doomsday for someone like me is that when you go to search, the default interface is a chatbot, right? And what you get back is pure information with citations, but ultimately no real need to click. I don't currently believe that that will be the default view of Google search. I think what we'll get is something which is a development of where we are today, which is AI overviews and similar types of feature and, an aggregation of content at the top of the SERP. But I think, for me, I would encourage anybody to go and look at Google Search Labs and look at their web guide product, right? We talked about this a couple of days ago, didn't we? The web guide product is currently in beta in the US, but it's an aggregated and organized search homepage that shows you collections of results by type. So that if you're coming in with a query about, I think the demo is advice for travelers going to Japan, what it's going to show you is, content from publishers like Bauer. If we were in travel, it's going to show you Reddit threads. It's going to show you social media posts from people who've been there. That is still a challenge for us compared to a 10 blue links web, right? It's still, let's be clear, that's still a challenge. That's still more competition for attention, but it's also not a full AI mode interface, which, if we accept that's not as desirable for Google as other surfaces. So that's where we are today. I'm not a sage, right? If I knew what we were doing, what Google was going to be doing in 3 years' time, then I'd probably not be on a chat with you at 7:00 in the morning. I'd be on my Caribbean island, Ricky. Let's be clear. But that's my current feeling, and I think for me, the really important point is that what Google doesn't alone determine how consumers behave. They also have to wait for consumer behavior to change and catch up. I think AI everywhere has a reputation problem for accuracy, right? When AI mode, I think when we were on stage, we were joking about the fact that the AI mode AI overviews was recommending that you put glue on your pizza to stop the cheese from falling off,
Yeah,
right?
it was a dark joke, I think.
It was a dark joke. Well, the LinkedIn post that I made that you responded to was the sort of 2026 version, which is that I think The Guardian had published a report that showed that AI overviews was recommending nutrition advice to cancer sufferers that would shorten their lives, right? So, the accuracy problem is real. We've all seen that, right? Hallucination, we see that every day. So I think those two things in combination, Google's real appetite to make that change and users' acceptance of the legitimacy of those answers, those are the sort of guardrails that determine the speed at which we move. And I think even if it is in 5 years' time a completely zero-click web, let's not catastrophize today, right? We're all running businesses today. We've all got to get on and run businesses today. If I look at my business over the last 12 months, absolutely some of our sites have seen decline in traffic, no doubt. Right? I won't hide from that. Some of our sites that perhaps have generated traffic over the years from sort of fairly low cost content about facts that are not really in debate. That those kind of sites, that kind of content.
What's the cubic space of the boot in a Fiat, right?
Specs data on cars, right? That is not proprietary information for us. That is widely accepted fact. There is no debate about how many litres a Skoda Kodiaq has in its boot space. It's freely available everywhere. That's been the case on the web for 15 years, right? 15 years. The example I always used to use was there's a great website called celebrityheights.com, right? Celebrityheights.com, probably 15 years ago, had a really great business, which is that if you went online and said, how tall is Tom Cruise? Celebrity Heights was there to tell you that he's, 5'6" or something. When Google started to introduce rich search features to its SERP, they pretty much wiped out celebrityheights.com's business because you don't need to go to a website to learn that he's 5'6". A lot of these AI features are really a more sophisticated version of that. So there are content categories where there will be zero click. We're at Google zero on some content categories. But media businesses that know what they're doing aren't really dependent on that kind of content for their business. We aren't. What drives us is not those kind of facts that nobody really disputes or debates, but actually, in automotive, actually where we put our time and effort and where we have a really strong reputation is not that the Skoda Kodiaq has got a 500-litre boot, but it's whether or not you should buy the Skoda Kodiaq versus the other competitors in its class. That can't be synthesized by AI. It just can't. And more importantly, consumers won't actually accept it being synthesized. This is where the value of real human experience from people who've got expertise in these products and can actually tell you in a way that's easy and enjoyable to understand what you need to know.
Yeah. So as a journalist, I've spent I don't know, 3 decades now, trying to translate between what media companies think and what tech companies think. And I always thought it was my job to translate journalism to the tech companies. Actually, I spend more of my time translating tech to the journalists now. And so you hear all the time, you hear it in your office all the time, the quality of our journalism is sacrosanct. When will people finally realize the value of our fantastic content? The irony is here, to some extent, if what you're saying is right, is that we've got a reversal of that, because what Google's saying is we're not going to give value to just telling us something that you've cut and pasted out of a magazine or out of a car's description. What we're
Mhm.
actually relying on you on is to actually write something meaningful and thoughtful as a journalist. And so in many ways, it sounds to me like this change is beginning to accentuate and put a value to the quality of that content. So it kind of makes journalists put their money where their mouth is, right? Or where their pen is, perhaps.
Yeah, and again, this is not an AI thing, right? Google loves the 3 and 4 letter acronyms, and sometimes it can be maddening talking to SEOs because we talk in 3 and 4 letter acronyms. But you will have heard of, I'm sure, EEAT, right?
Mhm.
It was originally EAT, and that was really easy to say, and then it became EEAT. But that predates ChatGPT, and it's basically one of the ways in which Google attributes expertise, experience, authority, and trustworthiness to content. And a trend over the last 5 years has been that that's become more and more important in how Google makes decisions about what to show consumers. What it isn't is just a profile page or an about us page or an author tag on a piece of content. People tend to assume that you can kind of add the EEAT to an article. You can't fake it. What it actually is that the road test editor on MCN has been testing superbikes for his entire adult life. At the weekend, what does he do? He gets up and he goes and rides bikes. That is his life. So that naturally imbues his content, probably subconsciously, with the weight of all of that experience in a way that cannot be faked. And what Google's trying to do with EEAT is really understand that and codify it, and it's doing it very, very well. I think let's leave AI behind for a second. What is definitely a challenge and competition for attention for journalists of the sort that I work with is the value of real human experience. And I think when we look at what's causing declines in search traffic for some publishers, it's really absolutely not only about AI features in the SERP. It's often just about a more varied search engine results page with more competition. That's actually, if you talk to anybody working as an SEO in a media business, I would say that's as big a challenge to us as
Can you explain that?
features.
Can you break that?
Yeah, of
Can you
course.
break that down?
Yeah, of course. So probably 5 or 10 years ago, if you were looking at what you got in the search engine results page, let's use I don't know, how can I buy a laptop for a student, right? I've got a child going to university. I want to spend £1,000 on a laptop. What's the best laptop to buy? Probably 5 years ago, what you would have had is really a load of tech sites in the top 10 links on page one, and that's really when we talk about SERP results, we're really talking about page one. There's an
Yeah.
old joke in SEO, which is best place to bury a body is on page 2 of search, right? So we're
Yeah.
talking about that's where all the clicks are. 60% of clicks or more are in the top 3 or 4 slots. So you'd have seen, the tech radars of the world in that. If you go and do that search today, you will still see many of those sites. But what you will also see is a YouTube video from somebody who's bought a MacBook Pro and it's their MacBook Pro and they've run it for 9 months and they're giving you insights into what they like and what they don't like about it. You'll see a bunch of Reddit forum posts about the same thing. You might see a laptop community, I don't know, overclockers or something like that. Might see posts from a gaming community. I don't think that's bad for users, right? What Google's doing when it looks at that is saying, well, we want to include professional opinion, but we also want to include the benefit of people who've actually bought this stuff and lived with it for 9 months and give you a completely unvarnished view based on a slightly different experience with the product. So for us as publishers, if you were sort of 6th or 7th best in the market at advising people on how to buy laptops, 6 or 7 years ago, you probably had a really good business because you were still in the SERP, right? A lot of the traffic would still accrue to the top players, but not all of it. Well, that's no longer the case because actually the competition for those precious links on page one is now divided between publishers, retailers doing content marketing, maybe the brand owner themselves, the Apple, Reddit forums, YouTube videos, social posts. Google now indexes all Instagram posts and often displays them in the SERP. So it's just more competition for attention. And so as publishers, we have to up our game. I think the challenge is that there probably isn't a business for you quite so much if you're not top three or even top one or two
Yeah.
in a sector.
Winner takes all. And we hear this a lot, don't we, on the web? The winner takes a lot. And then if you're the winner, the prize is enormous. If you're second or third, hell, if you're fifth, it's a very sharp slide, isn't it?
Yeah,
One of the things you
yeah.
said to me that I just want to go back to that I thought was fascinating was about the incentives. So it's always about incentives. The reason these tech companies behave the way they do, I've learned very cynically, but turned out to be very realistic, is that it's all about money at the end of the day. These companies are in an incredible bun fight with each other. It's all about growth. It's all about market share. It's all about valuation. It's all about net and gross revenue and margin. They're thinking very, very, very hard about this stuff. And so, to your point, it's all about incentives. It's fascinating to think, okay, well, let's say AI overviews is a great consumer product and it feels like an advancement of search. It's a change in search. But if you have to go and scrape the entire open web and then run analysis on it, imagine you were trying to do that on your laptop, right? It's not going to work. So what do you need? You need 50 million laptops with incredible compute power, right? And they're all really expensive. And you've got to do this every day to stay relevant, or maybe even multiple times a day. And the costs just rise and rise and rise. And if you Google, the product may be great, but you know what? The cost of producing it might mean that it's never going to get profitable, or it's just going to be incredibly hard, or it's going to eat into your margins. So I can understand that. Similarly, though, the Googles of the world rely, don't they, on gathering data from those clicks and those behaviors, and then that helps them optimize their machine to go faster. I actually saw something in the ad tech antitrust trial. There was a mention that Google runs an analysis every day that takes 14 hours on some ludicrous number of machines to update that every single day. And the amount of crunching and the amount of money that involves is enormous. So this leap into a different experience, you're right, undermines their current advertising business. And their search advertising business is the largest business of all within Alphabet. It's $280 billion or something.
Mhm.
So your point that, hey, it's both expensive, which means it's lower margin, profit margin, and it also doesn't train the machine to get smarter in the same way as the old one, and it undermines our major business, was a real realization for me. That had never occurred to me before.
But it is still a moat for them because they're not the only ones playing that game, right? ChatGPT is in exactly the same boat. The key difference is it doesn't have that advertising business behind it. So
Yeah,
I was listening to a podcast. I can't remember who I was listening to. It might have been Benedict Evans. I'm not sure, but whoever it was making the point around this code red situation for ChatGPT.
yeah,
It's not a problem right now because of course they're incredibly well funded. But you look at it over a 2 to 3 year span, and it feels existential because if they can't start to rival that advertising revenue moat that Google has, your point is right fundamentally, but also Google has this amazing lever where they can just fire hose revenue into a product if they need to. Right? Of course, they will attack the cost side of it at the same time, and I'm sure there's lots of very clever Googlers doing exactly that. But they have got this moat on being able to direct revenue to a large extent. But yeah, what you say is, I believe that, very, very much that it's just not as desirable today as the current model. Now, whether it evolves, who knows? But
yeah. But the cost of doing it will get cheaper, and the efficiencies will get better, and they'll learn. And the machines, we're going to have a breakthrough in quantum computing that will change everything again. So, all right. So let's put ourselves in the minds of publishers. And look, everyone's kind of reeling with the punches a little bit and a lot. Um, and a lot of them are still reliant on advertising. And even if they're reliant, or even if they rely on subscriptions, they still need as many new faces coming to their site or new eyes on their site as they can to be able to talk to them about their product, prove their worth. If you're well, you are, but if you were advising a group of publishers on what to do, what do you think the primary focus for them should be in this exact phase where we are right now?
well, I think it's two different questions there, isn't there? One is how do you monetize the attention? Well, let's flip it. first question is how do we achieve that attention from consumers? Because that's what we do fundamentally in
Yeah,
the
you
media
do.
business, right?
Yep.
And the second question is how do you monetize that attention? I'm not a specialist so much on the latter, right? I think the extent subscription businesses are of course desirable for all publishers over an advertising business because the ARPU on a subscription product is higher than the ARPU on an advertising product. Perfect if you can build a blend of both, but so the extent to which you can build a subscription business, I think really depends first and foremost on whether or not consumers will pay for that information. And the digital subscription business is now mature. And I think we have a good view of what consumers will pay for and what they won't pay for. My personal belief, not Bauer's belief, but my personal belief is that there is a limited extent to which people will pay to subscribe to non-news information. Right? If you look at a lot of publishers, people like Hearst, attempting to build membership models around information in health, beauty, fitness, home, and so on and so forth. I just don't think those businesses are ever going to be as successful as a pure news subscription product.
Really? Okay.
I personally just don't. There are exceptions, of course, but for a content-based business in those sectors, I personally don't necessarily think that there's as big a business. I think that there's a healthy business in hybrid print and digital subscriptions. I think there's lots of examples. If you look at Immediate Media, they built a really nice business on top of their core recipes business in BBC Good Food by buying a business called NutriCheck, which gives you nutritional data about the food you're eating. That is a healthy subscription business, but it's fundamentally not a pure content business. It's a blend of content, information, and a print product. But this isn't really a podcast about the future of consumer revenues, really, right? This is a podcast about how are we going to continue to achieve that consumer attention. I think for me, what we're talking about in our business is really two things. So one, of course, diversification, building a business that isn't completely reliant on Google. And that's so important. But it's also not a 3-year-old idea, right? We've been talking about that for 10 years.
Yeah.
The publishers are really smart, got ahead of that and built businesses that weren't so reliant on Google search. So diversification. And then, but I also think from a Google search perspective, there is still a very healthy business and lots of opportunity for growth in some areas. I think for us in our business, we are. My message is let's be really realistic and not waste time and energy chasing things which have gone and aren't coming back. Let's put our energy into the stuff that Google can't synthesize, the stuff that people can't get from ChatGPT. I really think, I'm hearing this more and more and more. There's a rising wave of consumer sentiment in a world where AI slop is everywhere. Look at YouTube. YouTube's a disaster today for AI slop.
Yeah,
It's just endemic. I think what starts to cut through from that is real human experience. I think people will genuinely seek real human experience, authentic voices. Businesses like Bauer are really well placed there because that's exactly what we have. Right? We are not going to go down the road of synthesizing road tests from somebody, to replace somebody who's got 40 years of riding road bikes under him.
Yep.
Right? It's just we'd be mad to do that. It's like we're walking away from our superpower at this time. So, but anyway, I'm rambling, Ricky, and I'm not answering your question. So from a consumer attention perspective, it's really about diversification, and it's also not having a business that relies on people coming back constantly from those surfaces. What we're doing, like every other publisher, is saying, well, of course, Google and to a slightly lesser extent, social are going to be where we find and engage new audiences. But once we've got that engagement, then we have to turn it into a direct one-to-one relationship. And that's typically via an email address or some other form of identity. And there's a good business there. There is a good business there.
There is. We haven't always done a great job of that, though. Lots of publishers have kind of become reliant on the Google source. Can I just ask something else then? So you mentioned diversification. When you say diversification, you're thinking, I'm assuming, that there are multiple other platforms with huge audiences that can send you traffic. There's TikTok. You mentioned YouTube. There are other platforms. Is that what you mean by diversification?
Yeah, I mean, so I think first and foremost, it's not relying on Google as the only place where you have that conversation with the user. Right.
Yep.
On some types of information search, it just will be right. If you're the reality is if you look at car buying, for example, people who read about car content broadly fall into two categories. There's the enthusiast who will just read about cars constantly, and actively looks forward to buying their next car and probably thinks about it when they, go to sleep, and they love it. It's a passion. But there's a much bigger constituent of people for whom that is a pain to solve, right? They need
Yeah.
to buy a car. They need to drive to work. It's a risk. They don't want to buy the wrong car. They don't want to
Is it
overpay.
the difference between people that can afford to buy an Aston or a new Aston and the people that have to buy a Fiesta? Is that the difference? Is that the
I
passion
mean,
difference?
it's not often about how much you spend, because actually, there's a healthy constituency of people who care about that Fiesta, and it's, they love that car, and it means freedom to them, and they personalize it and all the rest of it. So it's not always about how much they spend. Um, but yes, people who have to buy a car probably aren't going to go and buy an Aston Martin typically. But the point is that the reason I mention it is that the former category, you can probably build a direct one-to-one relationship via email, or they're going to follow your brand on social media, or they're going to look at your YouTube channel, and they're going to come and find you and consume your content. The latter, you might see them once every 3 years, right? They hate buying a car. They
Yeah,
don't want
okay.
to have to think about it. And that's a slightly different challenge, because you have to be there for them when they need you, but accept that when they don't need you, you're going to fade into the background, and you're just not going to be part of their media consumption. So for those types of consumers, and I think the same applies for financial services or health advice, the reality is that Google probably is going to be the path to finding that person when they need you. And so you're going to have to continue to find ways to engage those people via organic search. But for the passion-led verticals, actually, you can, and we have built very healthy businesses from followership, right? From people saying, I like your content, I'm going to follow you. Whether that's on social media, Apple News is a really huge business line for publishers. You might argue that that's just building another business on somebody else's land, and it is fundamentally.
It does feel a bit like that. I'm
It
just
is,
doing
but
some analysis on that right now.
yeah, and that's a really interesting business, right? Apple News. I look forward to your analysis, but it's a substantial revenue for Bauer. It's not one that we're depending on at all. It's not one that we're sort of building valuation on, but it's a really nice revenue line. It's a really valuable source of insight into what consumers want. We get really good insights into what they are paying attention to and what they're not. It's for us, within our audience ecosystem at Bauer, it's really nice signals that inform our content presentation on other surfaces as well, right? We learn a lot from.
Ultimately, it's about gathering that data in, though, to build your products in the perfect scenario that you don't need everybody else to help, right? It's about molding your product based on the information that you get back.
Yeah.
That's really the protection, isn't it? To say that, in the ideal future, you're not going to be reliant on somebody else to send you your traffic.
Yeah, but I don't think that future exists.
You don't?
I don't think. I think there's a very small number of publishing brands, even in news, that can truly have a Google Zero future. I'm sorry, but I do. If you're a really niche B2B information source, then there's probably a good Google Zero future. If you're, I don't know, the FT, there's probably a good Google Zero future. But I just don't see that. The reality of operating in a digital platform landscape is you are going to have to work with the platforms. I'm generally a glass half empty person, Ricky, but I do have some optimism that actually we will never get to a place where there is just no value exchange to be had with platforms. I think that if you accept that, what you accept is that there is no value for them in our content. And I don't believe that. I think actually, most of these platforms are really nothing without content from creators or other sources, including publishers.
Which brings me to something that you said. I jotted it down on a piece of paper. I've just dropped a piece of paper right here. So you said we need to think about optimizing for two different audiences in the way that we're making our content. We need to optimize for machines, for visibility to be discovered, but we also need to optimize for people, because that's about driving engagement. Can you explain that again? Because I think that's an insight that people, I think, would find. They kind of think, yeah, that's obvious. But nerd out for me a little bit on that. Drill into it a little bit to tell me why it matters so much.
This is where I think a lot of the disciplines that we have instinctively as SEOs actually apply beyond just Google as a service. They apply to really wherever consumers encounter digital content. Because what I mean by that is that the decision about what gets shown to consumers is made by a machine, right? By an algorithm. That's always been the case. So Google's crawler, Meta's crawler, Instagram's crawler, what it's going to do is consume that content. It's going to understand that content. It's going to use a blend of natural language processing. It's going to look at metadata that accompanies that content. It's going to look at where the content has come from. It's going to look at previous engagement signals, but it's going to fundamentally make a decision about whether it values that content or not. Content that it can show to users is in net oversupply. It always will be. So it has to, on behalf of the consumer, reject some types of content and show other types of content. That's fundamentally what ranking means or visibility means. So our job, firstly, is to make sure that those machines do value and understand that content. That's partly a technical task. That's where technical SEO comes in. That's about making sure that machines can actually crawl the content. It's about making sure that machines can access all of those content elements, whether that's video, images, text. It's about making sure that our sites are fast enough. It's about making sure that we are tagging with relevant metadata to give Google or anybody else the signals about what this actually means. So that's job one. That gets it in front of the consumers. Job two is that, these two things are codependent, right? If you get just one right and not the other, you'll fail. Job two is to actually get a human to engage with that content. Right? And that is, for me, is about framing and presentation and tone. It's about who it's coming from. So at a sort of very basic level, it's as simple as headlines and images, right? If it's amazing, and Bauer's a pretty digitally mature business, so we really don't encounter this too much. But you hear journalists saying, "Oh, I've done the SEO on that," and what you end up with, what you see them writing is a headline that it's just not how they would write a headline or sit next to a mate or send an email to a friend, right? It is what they think an SEO headline is. We've been on a really big journey at Bauer, really successfully, of getting people to remember that they are journalists fundamentally, having a conversation with a human. And so the art of a really great headline, the art of choosing a really great accompanying image, the art of a really great description has so much in common with the journalism that we've been practicing, in Bauer's case, for 150 years, right? We had 150th birthday last year.
Yeah, you're looking very good on it, by the way.
And people forget that, right? And they forget that at their peril. Fundamentally, once the thing is in front of the consumer, then it is a one-to-one human relationship from a journalist who wrote it and a consumer who's making the snap decision about whether or not they like it. And that is not just about the click in the SERP. It's also about, do they pause mid-feed and watch all of that vertical video? On Apple News, do they engage with it and read it? The Apple News business model is fundamentally the same as Spotify, right? It's based on engaged minutes. Your Apple News subscription of whatever it is, £12 a month, Apple keeps a proportion of that and it shares out the rest with publishers based on attention. So if you spend that money on Apple News and you read one article in that month, then the person who that article belongs to gets all that money. So it's Apple News is fundamentally a competition for consumer attention. Well, how do you win consumer attention? By doing good journalism. Write about something they're interested in, present it in a way which engages them, and create content that when they're reading it, they've enjoyed such that they finish it and they want to come back and read the same next week. But what I was saying to you when we were talking about this a few days ago is that is exactly the same as print journalism. Right? Anybody who works in print media will know that you have a subscriptions and newsstand team who work with the merchants and make sure that when you walk into a supermarket or a newsagent, your magazine is on the bookshelf in front of you. But if as an editor, you don't put any effort into a compelling cover image or a great set of headlines, that magazine is not going to be picked up and taken to the till. It's going to stay there and you're not going to make any money from it. That's exactly the same as this idea about machines determining visibility and humans determining engagement. It's not actually that different to journalism and newsstand circulation, is it? When you put it like that.
It's a great insight. So I'll tell you a story. So when I used to work at News Corp in London, back in the days of print, there was a guy that worked in the business that would go to the biggest selling newsagents in the country because we could see how many newspapers were selling, newsagent by newsagent. And then he would pay money to move our newspaper closer and closer and closer to the till, because the closest to the till it was, the customer always ends up there, right, with their wallet out. And then they see the newspaper and they buy it, right? So you'd spend a fortune creating a front page, a massive exclusive. You'd put 15 people on the story. You'd worked on it for 2 weeks, but it didn't matter a jot if no one bought it in the newsagent. So you then had a guy who would literally drive to the newsagent, have a look at the layout of the shop and go, I'm going to give you an extra $50 if you move my newspapers to this spot. It's the same as trying to get on page one of search, right? It's the kind of digital
Yeah, well, I mean, and actually, yeah, that is a very fun. And I'll tell you a very funny story. So back in the day, years ago, when I was first starting out in media, I worked on automotive print titles, and it was back when the UK Motor Show still happened up in Birmingham. And so, as a young sales rep, I'd be driving up to Birmingham to go to the NEC to the Motor Show, and I'd always stop in at like Warwick Services or something on the M40, and you could always tell whether my MD was ahead of me on the road or not by how many copies of what car had a full facing on the newsstand. Because what he used to do was stop at the services, and if he only saw one or two copies of what car, what he'd do is get them all out and run them all the way across the newsstand in front of you. So they were across Vogue and Elle and all the other magazines. So that was always the sign of whether or not I won't name him, but whether or not he was in front of you or not. But yeah, I mean, look, it's a good point. You can't buy your way to the top of search unless you're going to pay Google for the advertising. I mean, it's a really interesting point actually, because actually in some categories of content, if you look at things like insurance, for example, SEO is just not as important a discipline, because the reality is it's a search ads driven business, and most consumers, particularly because Google makes a lot of search ads pretty indistinguishable from organic search results. It's a search ads game. When I was at Future, I ran the paid search team at Go Compare. We had a really, really good organic search operation. We were ranking number one for the key queries, but the reality is that the attention was there in the paid ads, and that's where the clicks came from. And we couldn't really break that spell to any extent.
Amazing. So look, we'll leave it there. But look, I just want to share one thing as a journo. When you work in numbers and analytics, sometimes you can get a little bit lost in the science and miss the artistry of what we do. And I imagine you find that challenge all the time, because you're looking at the numbers and you see something really wonderful, but maybe the numbers aren't reflecting that. When I sit down to write a story, I am chuckling away to myself at my little in jokes. I'm loving the alliteration I might have found somewhere, or a snarky comment, or a funny phrase that I heard somebody say in the pub last Thursday week that I try and blend into the article. I used to run one of the largest newspapers in the world, and we used to have a joke. On a Friday night, we'd be in the pub and we'd choose a word that we had to get on the front page. And there's 60 million people who'd read that front page, and somehow you're trying to find out how to get I don't know, Paris into the front page. It's like, how am I going to do it? So there is artistry and there's fun in this. The funny thing the amusing thing is that when I do then publish those articles that I've had so much joy writing, I get joy back. Okay.
Yeah.
So, people send notes back and just go, oh, that was funny. Oh, I thought that was funny. Or they say to me, I found that amusing. It is important to have the joy in here as well as the numbers, but we have to do both, don't we? Right. So look, this has been really helpful to me. Your killer final piece of advice for a publisher.
I think it's what you just said, right? I've had my whole career in media. What I've loved all the way through, and it's the same as you, is that I'm not a journalist, but I love great journalism, and all the way through my career, I've really loved working with great editors and editorial teams. And actually, if I look back on it, the best relationships are the ones that have been characterized by some quite natural tension, right? The ones who protect their art at all costs. I love working with those people. I probably think of 10, maybe 15 editors in my life who have been genuinely maddening to work with at times. But fundamentally, it's because they are doing exactly what you said, right? They care about the craft. I passionately believe that for quality publishers like Bauer is the thing we can't lose sight of. It's the thing which is actually what differentiates us in the eyes of our consumers. It's what makes them come back. It's what makes them genuinely love our brands and our content and actually enjoy reading it. We're into an era where there is no premium on content creation anymore. Right? The actual mechanics of churning out words or images or video, there is no longer a premium on that. AI means that we can all produce content, horrible word, content. The differentiator is actually the quality of that people who really know what they're doing can produce, and the reaction that provokes in consumers. Fundamentally, the job that I do is about getting that in front of people at the right time, so that they enjoy it and love it. And I passionately believe that that will be our superpower. That will be our differentiator.
Does Google care?
Yeah, I think they do. I absolutely think they do. I don't necessarily think they always like it, but I do think they recognise that And that will come through in the data, right? Right today, YouTube is an absolute slop fest. Right? You look on any topics, search any query in Google, what you'll see is just a load of rubbish. And then what you'll also see amongst it is good content created by real humans. I'm often reminded, there's a great, your podcast is great, Ricky. Another podcast that people should go and listen to is Benedict Evans' podcast, right? And very early on when ChatGPT came out, he made an observation which I stuck with me and I think is so important. And he said that if you look at why humans are the apex predators on Earth, it's not because we have bigger teeth or that we can run faster. It's actually because we're really good at pattern recognition, right? That's what our brain does for us. And he said it means that, thousands of years ago, when we were at the water hole, we could tell the difference between a tiger coming through the reeds and wind coming through the reeds. So that innate sort of, thousands of years old skill is what enables us as consumers to distinguish between AI and real content. And he said it won't go away. And I think that's why, if you look at that YouTube homepage, you don't really know why until you start to think about it. You can tell the difference between the stuff that's real and the stuff that's not, but you can tell the difference, right? And so that's why I think the human created content will always be slightly ahead of the AI. I think it's an arms race that will never finish, however far the models evolve. That's my personal belief.
Hallelujah to that. Mate, thank you so much for giving up your time. Getting up. What time?
No
What
problem at all.
temperature is it outside? Is it minus something?
It's a number that's unpleasant and it's a low number.
All right. Well, look, been amazing. Thanks so much. I hope it's been useful for everybody. And I will see you again soon. Thank you, my friend.
No worries. See you soon, Ricky. Cheers.
See you later.